When you hear the words strategic communication, you might think of big offices, smart suits, and important meetings, but here, inside this story, inside this slow and gentle narration from Mr. English Lab, I want you to imagine something much simpler. Imagine you are walking into a quiet room, a room with warm light, soft air, and a long wooden table at the center, and you sit down because today you want to learn how to speak like someone who understands people, someone who communicates with calm power, someone who speaks clearly, naturally, and confidently, and as you sit there, listening to my voice, you feel that maybe the skill is not something very far away from you, but something you can grow step by step, slowly, with stories and with practice. And so our story begins with a moment that many people experience, but rarely talk about. A moment when you want to say something important, but the words do not come out the way you want, and you feel that small pressure inside your chest, like you know what you want to express, but you don't know how to deliver it. And in this story, that moment comes to a young man named Daniel, who stood in front of his team for the first time, holding a small notebook in his hand, trying to explain an idea that he truly believed in, but his voice felt thin, his mind felt crowded, and his message felt lost before he even started speaking, and as he looked at the faces in front of him, he felt something very human: fear, uncertainty, and the quiet wish to speak like a pro, to express himself smoothly, to be understood without confusion, and to make people feel that his words mattered. And so Daniel's story is the journey we will follow because his fear, his hesitation, his questions are the same feelings many English learners face, especially when trying to speak clearly, slowly, with confidence, in a second language, and maybe you have felt the same. Maybe you remember a moment when you wanted to ask a question, to join a conversation, or to share your idea, but you stayed quiet because the words did not feel ready, and that memory is exactly why this story exists, because strategic communication is not only about smart techniques or clever phrases. It is about something much deeper: learning how to connect, learning how to guide your thoughts, learning how to give your voice a direction. And in this first part of the story, as Daniel takes his first steps, you and he will learn together how communication can change, not by magic, not by talent, but by understanding simple, human patterns that help your message become clear. So imagine Daniel again, standing in front of his team, his hands shaking a little, his mind full of questions. And imagine him taking one slow breath, not because breathing solves all problems, but because breathing gives you time to think, and in that small quiet moment, he remembers something his mentor once told him. People do not listen to you because your idea is perfect. They listen to you because they feel your purpose, and so Daniel tries to speak with purpose. But the truth is, he doesn't know how, and so he starts speaking in short lines, explaining his idea fast, too fast, the way beginners often speak when they feel nervous. And maybe you know that feeling too, when your English becomes too quick, too messy, too heavy, when the words come out like they are running away from you, and that is exactly what happened to him, and his listeners, his team, slowly lost interest, their eyes drifting away. And in that second, Daniel had a quiet realization: communication is not only about words. Communication is also about rhythm, about tone, about the way you make people feel safe enough to follow your thoughts. And after the meeting, Daniel walked outside, feeling a little disappointed, not because he failed, but because he knew deep inside that he could do better, and he wanted to do better. And that feeling, that hunger to improve, that soft, powerful desire to become someone who speaks with clarity, is the same desire many language learners feel, and that desire is the beginning of strategic communication. So Daniel sat on a bench outside his office building, looking at the street, watching people move in different directions, and he began to wonder, what makes certain people speak in a way that others want to listen? What gives someone presence? What gives someone clarity? Why do some people speak slowly but still sound strong? Why do some people speak simple English but still sound confident? And as he sat with these questions, he felt something change inside him, not a big change, but a small spark, a small curiosity that whispered, there must be a better way, and that curiosity became the start of his learning journey. And so he walked to a small cafe after work, ordered a tea, and sat by the window, taking out his notebook, the same notebook he used earlier, but now he looked at it with a different eye, and he began to write simple reflections, simple thoughts about communication, not technical definitions, not complex rules, just simple observations. I speak too fast. I lose my message. I forget my purpose. I fear judgment. And as he wrote these lines, he suddenly felt lighter because writing helps you see what is invisible, and he realized that strategic communication begins with something very quiet, self-awareness, the ability to observe yourself without judgment. And this is where our story and your English journey connect, because learning to communicate clearly in English also begins with self-awareness, with noticing how you speak, what you fear, what you rush, what you avoid, and once you see these things, you can change them slowly, kindly. And as he wrote, Daniel noticed something interesting. He always felt pressured to sound smart, to sound perfect, to sound like a leader, and this pressure made him tense, made him unnatural, made him lose his true voice. And maybe you can relate to this pressure. The pressure to sound like a native speaker, the pressure to avoid mistakes, the pressure to be fluent immediately, and this pressure steals your clarity, steals your calm, steals your natural flow. And as Daniel sat there, he had a quiet realization that the goal of communication is not perfection but connection, and this realization opened a new door inside him, a door that whispered, speak simply, speak clearly, speak with meaning. And he decided that he would learn how to do exactly that, beginning little by little. So he watched people in the cafe, listening to their tones, their pauses, their expressions, noticing how certain people spoke slowly and gently, and how others used short sentences that sounded confident without being complicated. And the more he observed, the more he understood something basic and beautiful. Strategic communication is natural, not mechanical. It is human, not technical. It is more about presence than performance. And when he left the cafe, walking home under the soft light of the street lamps, he felt something new, hope, a small quiet feeling that maybe he could learn this skill. Maybe he could change the way he speaks. Maybe he could express himself with calm power. And as he walked, he imagined himself speaking in front of the team again one day, but this time with slow, steady words, with simple English, with clear direction. And in that moment, he felt the beginning of transformation, not the final transformation, but the first step, the moment when you choose to grow. And when he reached home and sat on his bed, he thought about the day, about his mistake, about his realization, about his new intention, and he whispered softly to himself, tomorrow, I start again. And that whisper became the small seed of change. And this is where section 1 ends, with a simple message for you. Communication begins with awareness, and awareness begins with honesty. And when you look at your English, your fears, your habits, with gentle honesty, you start to grow, slowly, naturally, like a story that takes its first breath. And so, as Daniel prepares for the next part of his journey, you prepare with him, ready to learn how strategic communication truly works, ready to discover how simple English, spoken with purpose, can make you sound like a pro. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, not because he had a big meeting, not because someone told him to prepare, but because something inside him felt different, a quiet curiosity that made his mind open and awake. And as he sat at the edge of his bed, looking at the soft morning light entering the room, He realized that today he wanted to understand something deeper about communication, something simple but powerful, something that many people ignore: the art of listening. And as you sit here listening to this gentle story, you might wonder why listening matters so much when the goal is to speak like a pro. But the truth is, every great communicator is first a great listener, and Daniel did not know this yet. But he was about to learn it in a way that would completely change the way he saw speech, confidence, and human connection. So he got dressed, left his apartment, and walked to a small park near his home, the same park he used to pass by without noticing. But today, for some reason, he chose to sit on a wooden bench facing a large, old tree, and while he sat there, he noticed something strange happening inside his mind. His thoughts were quieter than usual, almost as if the air itself was telling him to slow down. And for the first time in a long while, he simply listened, not to people, not to words, but to the world around him, the soft wind moving through the leaves, the distant sound of someone jogging, the laughter of a child chasing a ball, and in this quiet moment, he felt his breathing soften, his shoulders relax, and his mind open, and this simple act of listening changed something inside him, because he realized that listening creates space, and space creates clarity. The same clarity he could use when speaking, and as he sat there, he remembered how nervous he felt the day before, how rushed his voice sounded, how he spoke faster than his thoughts, and he wondered if maybe the reason he struggled was not because he lacked vocabulary or grammar or experience, but because he lacked space, the space that comes from listening, observing, and giving your thoughts time to form naturally. And as he reflected on this, an older man sat on the bench beside him. Someone Daniel had seen before in the neighborhood but never spoken to, and the man smiled gently and said, "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" And Daniel nodded, not just to agree, but because he felt grateful for that moment of connection, and he replied softly, "Yes, it is." But what surprised him was not the words, but the feeling he had while speaking. His voice was calm, slow, and natural, and he realized that when he listened first, speaking felt easier, softer, clearer, and the older man continued, "I come here every day to watch people, to listen to the world. It teaches me more than books ever did." And this simple line felt like a small lesson falling right into Daniel's hands, and he asked, "Why does listening matter so much?" And the man laughed gently, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask that question. And he said, "Because people don't speak only with words. They speak with silence, with eyes, with tone, with rhythm. If you listen to all of that, you will always know what to say." And Daniel felt something shift inside him, something that felt like the beginning of understanding, and he realized that communication is not a fight to speak, but a dance between listening and responding, receiving and expressing, feeling and sharing. And as he sat with that realization, he imagined all the times he tried to speak too quickly, afraid of silence, afraid of pauses, afraid of slow thinking, and he saw clearly why he struggled, because he never gave himself permission to listen to his environment, to others, or even to his own thoughts. And that morning, he decided that listening would become his first practice before learning how to speak with power. So after the older man left, Daniel stayed on the bench a little longer, closing his eyes, listening to the world again, noticing the simple sounds he had never paid attention to, and the more he listened, the more he felt his mind open, and he thought to himself, maybe communication is not about saying more, but about saying less with more meaning. And this idea felt so true, so human, that he wrote it in his notebook right away, and when he arrived at work later that morning, he entered the office not with the pressure to prove himself, but with a new intention: to observe people with more care, So throughout the day, he listened to his coworkers, not with half attention, not while thinking about his reply, but with full presence, and what he discovered surprised him deeply. He noticed how some people used strong words but had weak tone, how others had small words but spoke with warm rhythm, how some spoke slowly but with confidence, and how some spoke fast but seemed unsure. And as he watched all this, he began to understand something very important. Communication is not about the size of your vocabulary, but about the alignment of your voice, your tone, your purpose, and your presence. And this realization made him look at himself again, not in judgment, but in awareness, and he saw clearly that he often spoke quickly because he feared silence, and he feared silence because he feared losing control, and that fear made him lose control anyway. And in that simple moment of self-reflection, he understood one of the core truths of strategic communication. Silence is not the enemy. Silence is support. Silence is clarity. Silence is the space where your message breathes. And as he continued observing throughout the day, something else caught his attention. People who spoke well always had one thing in common. They made others feel understood, and Daniel realized that to make others feel understood, you must first understand them, and to understand them, you must listen. And this awareness turned into a turning point inside him, not a big moment with applause or spotlight, but a quiet internal shift, a shift that made him say to himself, "Before I speak, I will listen. Before I explain, I will explore. Before I express, I will observe." And this simple decision was the beginning of his transformation. Later, at lunch, he sat with two coworkers who were discussing a new project, and instead of jumping into the conversation with quick comments, Daniel listened closely, noticing how each person expressed their point, how one spoke with excitement and another with concern, and when he finally spoke, he spoke slowly, gently, and with clarity, saying, "It sounds like both of you want the project to succeed, but you're looking at it from different angles." And both coworkers paused, turning toward him, surprised, because his voice carried calm understanding, and in that moment, Daniel felt something he had not felt in a long time. Confidence. Not loud confidence, but quiet confidence, the kind that grows from awareness, not from force. And when he walked back to his desk, he felt proud, not because he spoke perfectly, but because he spoke with presence, and that feeling stayed with him the entire day. And when he returned home that evening, he sat at his table, opened his notebook again, and wrote, "Today I listened. And because I listened, my words felt real." And as he wrote this line, he realized the central lesson of this part of his journey. Communication is not about being impressive, it is about being present. And so Daniel closed his notebook with a small smile, feeling that he had taken the second step on a long path, and that step had taught him something he would never forget. When you learn to listen deeply, you begin to speak with natural clarity, and your words become not just sounds, but bridges that connect minds, hearts, and ideas. And as he prepared for bed, he reflected softly, "Tomorrow, I speak with intention," and that quiet promise became the doorway to the next chapter in his growth. The next day began with a quiet determination in Daniel's heart, a kind of steady energy that wasn't loud or dramatic, but soft and steady, like a small flame that refuses to disappear. And as he sat on the side of his bed once again, tying his shoes, he thought about everything he had learned so far about awareness, about listening, about space, and he felt ready for something new, something deeper, something that would help him find not just clarity in communication, but his true voice, the voice that felt real, the voice that felt honest, the voice that felt like him. And as he stood up and walked toward the kitchen to make a cup of warm tea, he whispered to himself a promise. Today, I will speak with intention. And this quiet sentence became the guide for the entire day. When he stepped outside, the morning air felt cool against his skin, and as he walked down the street, he thought about what intention really meant, not the complicated definition from books or business training programs, but a simple, human understanding. Speaking with intention means speaking with purpose, not speaking to fill silence, not speaking to impress, not speaking to avoid discomfort, but speaking because you have something that matters enough to be shared. Even if the words are simple, even if the sentences are short, even if your voice shakes a little. And as he walked, he remembered a moment from his childhood, a moment when he stood in front of his class for the first time to present a small story he had written, and he remembered how nervous he felt, how his fingers trembled, how his voice cracked, but he also remembered something else, something much more important. He remembered the feeling of telling a story he believed in, a story he loved, and even though he was nervous, his voice felt alive because his intention was strong, and this memory reminded him that the power of communication does not come from perfect delivery, but from sincere purpose. And with that thought warming his mind, he continued walking to work, feeling a new kind of confidence building inside him, a confidence born not from skill but from intention. When he reached the office, the day began with the usual noise, keyboards clicking, people chatting, phones ringing. But Daniel moved through the space differently now, listening more deeply, observing more gently, and holding his intention quietly inside his chest. And then, just before the morning meeting, something unexpected happened. His manager approached him and said, "Daniel, can you share a quick update with the team today? Just a short explanation of the design idea you were working on." And immediately Daniel felt a small rush of worry. Not fear exactly, but the familiar spark of uncertainty that comes when you are asked to speak in front of others. But instead of panicking, instead of letting the tension take over, he took a small breath, remembering the lessons of the last 2 days, and he asked himself one simple question: what is my intention? And the answer came naturally: I want to help my team understand the idea clearly. And with that intention, everything felt lighter, calmer, easier to carry. So when he entered the meeting room, instead of sitting quietly in the corner trying to hide his nerves, he chose a seat near the center, not to show off, not to pretend he wasn't nervous, but to show himself that he belonged in the room, that his voice had value. And as the manager began the meeting, Daniel listened closely, noticing the rhythm of the conversation, the energy of the room, the behaviors of different team members. And he waited for the moment when he would be invited to speak, and when his name was finally mentioned, he felt a small moment of silence inside his mind, like time paused just for him, and in that silence he remembered his intention again. And he began to speak, but this time, he did not rush, he did not squeeze his sentences together, he did not worry if someone would judge him. Instead, he spoke slowly, using short, simple sentences, allowing small pauses between ideas, and letting his voice flow naturally at a pace that felt comfortable to him. "I want to explain this idea," he said softly, "because I think it can help us create a design that feels easier for our clients." And as he continued, he noticed something surprising. People were listening, truly listening, their eyes focused on him, their bodies turned toward him, and for the first time, he did not feel like he was fighting for attention. He felt like he was offering something useful, something meaningful, and because his intention was clear, his voice felt clear too. And even though his grammar was simple, even though his words were easy and not fancy, his message felt strong because he spoke from a place of clarity and purpose. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable silence he feared, but a thoughtful silence, the kind of silence that shows people are thinking, processing, understanding, and then his manager nodded slowly and said, "That was clear." "Thank you, Daniel," and two of his colleagues even added questions that showed they were engaged, and this surprised Daniel, not because he thought he wasn't capable, but because he had never experienced this kind of calm confidence before. And as he walked out of the meeting room, he felt lighter, as if something that once held him back had loosened its grip, and he realized something important. Speaking with intention turned fear into direction, and confusion into clarity. And throughout the rest of the day, Daniel kept practicing this idea silently in his mind. Every time he spoke to someone, every time he explained something, every time he asked a question, he asked himself first, "Why am I speaking?" And this question helped him choose his words more carefully, more calmly. And later that afternoon, when a coworker approached him with a problem, instead of giving a quick answer just to sound helpful, Daniel listened first, then spoke with intention, choosing sentences that supported the conversation instead of controlling it, and the coworker left the conversation saying, "Thank you, that actually helps," and this small moment meant so much to Daniel, because he finally began to see that intention is not something you declare loudly, it is something you hold quietly inside the way you think and speak. That evening, when he walked home, the sky was slowly turning orange and gold, and the gentle sunset made everything look softer. And as Daniel walked under the warm light, he thought about the day, about how different he felt, about how a small change in mindset transformed the way he spoke, and he smiled to himself because he realized something beautiful. Speaking with intention makes communication feel natural, not forced. It makes you speak like yourself, not like someone you are trying to copy, and this realization filled him with a calm joy, the kind of joy that comes from progress. And when he reached home, he opened his notebook again, writing, "Today I spoke with intention, and my voice felt real," and he underlined the word real, because that is what it meant to him: authentic, honest, grounded. And before going to bed, he sat near the window, watching the last light of the day disappear behind the buildings, and he whispered softly to himself, "I am learning," and that simple whisper carried both gratitude and hope, because he knew that this skill, this art of intentional communication, would continue to grow inside him, shaping his voice, his confidence, and his way of connecting with the world. And this is the takeaway he leaves for you in this part of the journey. Your voice becomes stronger not when you speak louder, but when you speak with intention, and intention grows when you listen to yourself, when you respect your thoughts, and when you allow your words to come out slowly, naturally, with meaning. And so, with intention guiding him forward, Daniel prepares for the next step in his communication journey, a step that will take him deeper into the heart of strategic speaking, learning how to shape a message so that people not only hear it but remember it. The next morning arrived with a gentle quietness, and as Daniel stepped out of his apartment, he felt something different in the air, as if the world itself was giving him space to think, to breathe, and to grow. And as he walked down the familiar street toward work, he realized that he had already learned 3 powerful pieces of communication: awareness, listening, and intention. But something inside him whispered that there was still a missing piece, something that connected everything together, something that would help him not only speak clearly but shape his message in a way that people would remember long after he stopped talking. And as he walked, he wondered what that missing piece might be. And he felt a mixture of curiosity and excitement warming his chest. When he arrived at the office, he noticed the team was preparing for a special workshop, a half-day training session led by an invited speaker, someone the company described as an expert in strategic communication. And the moment Daniel heard those words, he felt his heartbeat quicken, not out of fear, but out of anticipation, because he had been learning through experience and intuition, but now he would meet someone who dedicated their life to this skill. And he hoped that maybe, just maybe, this person would reveal the missing piece he was searching for. So when everyone entered the large meeting room where the workshop would take place, Daniel chose a seat near the front, not to impress anyone, not to stand out, but because he wanted to be close enough to observe every detail, tone, rhythm, expression, presence, and when the speaker entered the room, the atmosphere shifted, not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she carried a soft confidence, a calm energy that made everyone sit a little straighter, breathe a little deeper, and pay attention without being asked. She smiled warmly and began speaking, and her voice was so gentle, so steady, so clear, that the room fell completely silent, and Daniel found himself leaning forward slightly, fascinated by the simplicity of her speech, the natural flow of her words, the ease with which she carried her message, and she began with a sentence that landed deep inside him. A strong message is not about saying everything. A strong message is about saying the right thing in the right order, and Daniel felt something inside him awaken, because he had never thought about order before. He had thought about vocabulary, tone, pace, intention, but not about structure. And the speaker continued, if you want people to understand you, to remember you, and to trust your words, you must guide them, not push them. You must shape your message like a path that they can walk on easily. And as she spoke, Daniel felt the missing piece slowly becoming clearer, and he listened more closely, trying to absorb every detail. The speaker asked the team a simple question. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone talks and talks, but you don't know what they are trying to say? And the whole room laughed softly, because everyone knew that experience, and she nodded and said, that happens when we speak without structure. When we speak only from emotion. When we speak only from reaction. But when you shape your message, you give your listener a map, and she paused for a moment, letting the silence settle softly, and Daniel appreciated the pause, because it made the idea feel more powerful, and she continued, a message needs 3 things, clarity, direction, and connection, and she wrote these 3 words on a board at the front of the room, and Daniel stared at them, feeling a quiet recognition growing inside him, because these words felt like the structure he had been missing. She explained, clarity means the listener knows exactly what your message is. Direction means the message moves with purpose from one idea to another. Connection means the message speaks to something human, emotion, value, experience, and as she spoke, Daniel remembered all the times he had spoken without clarity, without direction, without connection, and he felt grateful, not embarrassed, because now he could see the path to improvement. The speaker then gave a simple example, one that made the whole room smile, because it was so easy to understand. Imagine you are telling someone about a new idea. You can either say everything at once and confuse them, or you can give them a simple path, one clear sentence, one direction, one feeling, and she demonstrated with her own voice, speaking slowly, gently, showing how one sentence could lead naturally to the next, like footsteps on a quiet trail. And Daniel watched her carefully, absorbing the rhythm, the pacing, the softness of her tone, and he realized something important. The strength of her message did not come from complicated words, but from the calm order of her ideas. After the demonstration, she gave the team a small exercise. Take one idea from your work, any idea, and shape it into one clear sentence first. Then expand it slowly, step by step, with intention, and Daniel immediately thought of the project idea he had shared the day before, and he pulled out his notebook, writing the idea in one simple line. The new design helps clients understand our product faster, and he looked at the sentence, surprised by how clean and simple it felt, and he remembered how the day before he had tried to explain everything all at once, making his explanation heavy and rushed. And now he saw how one simple sentence could serve as the anchor for the whole message. The speaker then said, now give your message direction. Ask yourself, what comes first? What comes next? What comes last? And Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the design idea as a small journey, picturing how he wanted the listener to move from understanding the problem to seeing the solution, to feeling the value, and slowly, gently. He wrote the direction: problem, idea, benefit, example, and as he looked at the order, he felt a small satisfaction growing inside him because this structure made everything feel easier, lighter, more natural. After the direction, the speaker said, "Now add connection. Why does this matter? How does it help people? How does it make their lives easier?" And Daniel felt his heart warm with this question because connection always reminded him of intention, of purpose, of meaning, and he wrote, "This design reduces confusion. It makes clients trust us more. It makes the experience smoother." And as he looked at these lines, he felt the message becoming alive, becoming complete, becoming human. The speaker walked around the room, observing everyone's writing, and when she reached Daniel's table, she smiled softly and said, "Your structure is simple and clear." That's the beginning of strong communication, and Daniel felt a quiet pride rise inside him, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the soft kind that gives strength. After the exercise, the speaker continued with another powerful lesson. "Your message should feel like a story," she said, "not a list of facts, not a collection of random thoughts, but a small journey with a beginning, a middle, and an end." And she explained how stories help people remember, how stories help people understand meaning, how stories help people feel connected, and as Daniel listened, he remembered the stories he loved as a child, how they pulled him in, how they made him feel safe, curious, and alive. And he realized that communication is not only a skill but a kind of storytelling, even in simple conversations, even in meetings, even in daily life. After the workshop ended, Daniel walked out of the room slowly, letting the ideas settle inside him like warm stones, and he felt something shift again, something deep and steady, a new understanding of how to shape his message so people could follow, remember, and trust his words. He walked to the cafe near his office, the same one where he reflected days before. And he sat at his favorite table by the window, opening his notebook again, and this time, instead of writing feelings or reflections, he practiced the structure he had learned, taking different ideas and shaping them into clear sentences, giving them direction, adding connection, and each time he finished one, he felt his confidence grow, not because he was perfect, but because he finally had a simple tool he could use again and again. As he practiced, he realized something profound. Structure creates freedom, because when your message has order, your mind feels calm, and when your mind feels calm, your voice becomes clear, and when your voice becomes clear, people trust you. When he walked home later that evening, the city lights glowing softly around him, he felt a new sense of purpose rising in his heart, because he finally understood the missing piece, the power of shaping a message, and as he arrived home, he wrote in his notebook, "A message is a path. If I guide people, they will follow," and this line became the takeaway for the day, a simple truth that would guide him in every conversation from now on. And as he prepared for sleep, he whispered to himself with a gentle smile, "Tomorrow I learned to speak with presence," because he knew that the next part of his journey would bring him deeper into the heart of communication, where confidence, emotion, and expression come together to make a message unforgettable. The next morning, Daniel woke with a feeling he had never experienced before, a deep, steady confidence that wasn't loud or dramatic but warm and grounding, like the gentle feeling of sunlight on the skin after a long, quiet night. And as he sat up in his bed, he realized that something inside him had shifted over the last few days, not suddenly, not magically, but slowly and naturally through awareness, through listening, through intention, and through learning how to shape a message. And now he felt ready to learn the final piece of communication he had been searching for: presence, that invisible quality that makes people pay attention without being asked, that soft power that turns simple words into meaningful moments. That calm energy that makes someone look like a true communicator, a true leader, a true storyteller, even if their English is simple and their voice is quiet. And as he stood up, the morning light touching the edges of his room, he whispered to himself, "Presence." Letting the words settle in his mind like a small seed ready to grow, he made his tea, sat by the window, and opened his notebook where he saw his earlier notes, and he realized he had learned so much already. But the journey was not complete without understanding how presence works, how presence gives shape to silence, how presence holds attention, how presence makes people feel safe, seen, and understood. And as he wrote the word presence on a clean page, he wondered what it truly meant. Because presence is not something you can touch, or see directly, or measure like a tool, and he thought about the workshop speaker from yesterday, how her calmness filled the room, how her soft tone carried weight, and he realized that presence is not about being big. It's about being here, fully in the moment, fully connected to what you say and who you're speaking to. And with that thought warming his mind, he left his apartment and walked down the street toward work, feeling the world around him in a new way, noticing the air, the sound of footsteps, the soft hum of the city waking up, and he understood that presence begins with noticing, with being aware of yourself and your surroundings at the same time, not lost in thoughts, not rushing forward, but being grounded in the now. When he arrived at the office, he didn't walk quickly like he usually did. He walked with calm steps, not slow, not fast, but steady, and something interesting happened. People greeted him differently. Their eyes stayed on him a little longer. Their smiles were warmer, and he realized that people can feel presence even before you speak. That morning, the team gathered for a smaller meeting, a casual discussion about upcoming tasks. And Daniel sat at the table with a quiet confidence, listening deeply again, but this time with more awareness of himself too. The way he breathed, the way he sat, the way his eyes looked at others, and he noticed that presence is also physical, not in a dramatic way, but in a grounded way, like sitting without shrinking, breathing without rushing, looking at people with calm attention. During the meeting, someone asked Daniel a question about his idea from the day before, and instead of answering quickly, instead of jumping into the sentence immediately, he paused gently, allowed one soft breath, and then spoke slowly, naturally, clearly, and in that moment something became clear to him. Presence lives in the pause, the small moment of silence before you speak, the small space that gives your thoughts time to settle and your words time to form. And as he continued speaking, Daniel used the structure he learned, the intention he practiced, the listening he had developed, and the awareness he now carried. And his message flowed in a way that felt almost effortless, simple but strong, clear but human, calm but confident, and he saw his teammates nodding, not in a polite way, but in a real understanding way, and he felt a warmth in his chest because he knew his words were landing the way he hoped. After the meeting, his manager approached him quietly and said, "Your communication has changed these last few days. You sound more clear, more grounded," and Daniel felt something inside him open with gratitude, not because he wanted praise, but because he knew he had earned this change step by step. Later in the day, something unexpected happened. Daniel was invited to join a client call, not to lead it, but to observe and perhaps share his idea at the end. And the thought made him nervous for a moment, but he placed his hand gently on his chest, feeling his breath, and remembered the word presence. And he whispered internally, "Be here." And as he entered the small meeting room where the call would take place, he centered himself, sitting with a relaxed posture, letting his breathing settle into a soft rhythm. And as the call began, he listened deeply. noticing not only the words, but the tone of the client, their pacing, their concerns, their hesitations, and he realized that presence is not only about how you speak, but also about how you receive communication, how you make the other person feel. Understood. When it was time for him to share his part, his manager introduced him, and Daniel felt a moment of silence again. But this time, he welcomed the silence like an old friend, and he began speaking with a steady, gentle voice, using short, simple sentences, shaping his message the way he had practiced, and even though the client could not see him physically, they could feel his calmness, his clarity, and his sincerity through his tone alone, because presence travels through voice. When he finished, the client responded positively, asking a few more questions, and Daniel answered them with intention, not rushing, not pretending to know more than he did, but staying grounded, staying honest, staying present, and when the call ended, his manager looked at him proudly and said, "That was excellent, Daniel," and Daniel felt a quiet joy bloom inside him again, because he finally understood something he had never understood before. Presence is not a performance. Presence is truth. Presence is being fully here with the person in front of you, not hiding, not overthinking, not rushing, but simply being real. After work, Daniel walked to the park instead of going straight home, and he sat on the same bench where he had learned to listen days earlier, and as he watched the gentle movement of the trees and the soft dance of light through the leaves, he reflected on the journey he had taken in such a short time, and he realized how much he had changed, not because he became perfect, not because he became a native speaker, not because he suddenly knew every communication trick, but because he grew slowly, gently, by understanding simple truths. Communication begins with awareness, becomes stronger with listening, becomes clearer with intention, becomes memorable with structure, and becomes powerful with presence. And as he sat there, he felt gratitude for every moment, every lesson, every breath that helped him learn, and in that quiet moment, he thought about something important. Communication is not only a skill you use at work, it is a skill you carry through life, a skill that shapes relationships, friendships, opportunities, moments of connection. And he felt proud of himself for taking the first step days ago, the step many people never dare to take, the step of asking, "How can I grow?" The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with soft orange colors, and Daniel stood up slowly, feeling a deep sense of peace, and he whispered softly to himself, "I can communicate with presence," and the words felt true, strong, and real. When he returned home, he opened his notebook one last time for the day and wrote, "Presence makes my message alive," and under it he added, "People feel my calm. People hear my clarity. People trust my honesty," and he smiled gently as he closed the notebook because he knew he had reached a new level of himself, a level where communication was no longer something he feared, but something he could use naturally, confidently, intentionally. And that night, as he prepared for sleep, he realized the true takeaway of his entire journey so far. Strategic communication is not about perfect English, not about big words, not about quick thinking, but about connecting with your own voice and using it with calm purpose. And when you do that, you speak like a pro, even if your language is simple. And with that gentle truth resting in his heart, Daniel drifted into sleep, ready for the next chapter of growth in his life, and ready to continue learning how to express himself with clarity, emotion, and presence day by day. The next morning arrived softer than the others, and when Daniel opened his eyes, he felt a peaceful calm inside him, the kind of calm that comes only after you have walked through fear, confusion, and uncertainty, and found something stronger on the other side. And as he sat up slowly, he looked around his room and realized how much he had changed in such a short time, not in a dramatic way, not in a way the world would immediately notice, but in a way he felt deeply inside his heart, and this quiet inner strength made him smile gently to himself. He stood up and stretched his arms, letting his body wake fully, and while making his morning tea, he reflected on everything he had learned, how awareness helped him see his habits, how listening opened his understanding, how intention guided his voice, how structure shaped his message, and how presence gave life to everything he said. And he realized that all of these pieces were not separate lessons, but connected parts of one big transformation, like stones in a path that carried him from uncertainty to confidence. And as he held the warm cup in his hands, he whispered to himself, "This is who I am becoming," and the words felt natural, true, and grounding. He walked out of his apartment and felt the cool morning air brushing gently against his face, and as he walked down the street, he noticed something beautiful. Everything looked familiar, but he felt different inside, stronger, softer, clearer, and that change made the world feel new. When he arrived at work, something unexpected happened. His manager approached him and said, "Daniel, we have a special meeting today with the department heads. I want you to present your design idea." And for a moment, time seemed to stop around him, not because he was afraid, but because this was the moment he had secretly hoped for, the moment when he could finally test everything he had learned. And he felt a warm wave of nervousness rise inside his chest, but it wasn't the painful nervousness from before. It was the nervousness that shows you care, that shows you are alive, that shows you are stepping into your growth. He nodded calmly and said, "I can do it," and even he was surprised by the steady tone of his own voice. The meeting was scheduled for the afternoon, so he spent the morning preparing, not by writing a script word for word, not by memorizing lines, but by shaping his message again the way he learned, one clear sentence at the center, a simple path of ideas, a human connection point. And while he practiced quietly, he focused not on sounding perfect, but on staying present, breathing gently, letting his voice follow the natural rhythm of his thoughts. And when the time came, he walked into the large meeting room with a calm confidence, not pretending to be someone else, not hiding behind forced professional language, but carrying his true voice, his real presence. As he stood in front of the room, he felt the small, familiar rise of nervous energy again, but instead of fighting it, he allowed it to exist, breathing deeply, grounding his feet on the floor, reminding himself silently, "I am here, and my message matters." And with one small pause, he began to speak. He started with clarity, delivering his main message in one simple line, and as he spoke, he could see the department heads leaning slightly forward, listening with real focus, and this small moment gave him more confidence. He continued with direction, guiding them gently from problem to idea to benefit to example, keeping his sentences short and human, and he used his pauses not to fill silence, but to give space, to let his message breathe, to let the listeners absorb each step. And then he added connection, explaining with simple, heartfelt words how the design would make the client's experience easier, smoother, and clearer. And as he spoke, he felt something powerful happen inside him. His voice didn't just carry words, it carried truth, it carried intention. And he could feel the room trusting him, following him, connecting with him. Halfway through the presentation, he noticed something that made him smile internally. He was enjoying the moment, not just surviving it, but actually enjoying the act of expressing, sharing, communicating, and he realized he had become the person he dreamed of being days ago, someone who could speak with calm presence, even in important moments, even in a second language. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for one long, warm second, the same kind of thoughtful silence he had learned to appreciate, and then one of the department heads said, that was clear and easy to follow, and another added, "The structure makes a lot of sense." And finally his manager smiled and said, "Great work, Daniel." And hearing these simple words, Daniel felt a wave of emotion rise inside him, a mix of gratitude, pride, and quiet disbelief, and he realized something beautiful. He didn't just present well, he communicated with purpose, and everyone in the room felt it. After the meeting ended, Daniel stepped outside the building for a moment of fresh air, and as he stood there, looking at the sky, he felt a deep sense of joy, not the loud kind that makes you shout or jump, but the soft kind that fills your chest like warm light, and he realized that communication had finally become a natural part of him, not something forced, not something stressful, but something he could do with ease, something he could use to connect, to share, to lead, to express his ideas. Later that evening, instead of rushing home, he walked back to the park where his journey began, the park where he sat on the bench and listened to the world for the first time. And when he reached the bench, he sat down slowly, letting his body relax, letting his mind settle, and he breathed in the cool evening air, feeling grateful for every step that had brought him to this moment. He took out his notebook, the same notebook that had carried all his reflections, all his doubts, all his hopes, and he turned to the last page, writing one final line: "I can communicate clearly. I can communicate with purpose. I can communicate with presence." And as he wrote the words, he felt tears gather slowly in his eyes, not because he was sad, but because he had grown, because he had transformed, because he had found a new voice inside himself. And as the sun slowly set behind the trees, painting the sky with warm orange light, Daniel realized the true message of his journey. Not that communication is a skill you master once, but a path you walk every day, a path built with awareness, listening, intention, structure, and presence. And as long as he continued walking this path, he would continue growing, connecting, and expressing himself with more confidence than ever before. And he hoped that anyone listening to his story, anyone practicing English, anyone trying to speak with clarity and calm, would remember one simple truth: you don't need perfect words to communicate like a pro. You don't need a perfect accent to be understood. You don't need big vocabulary to be powerful. You only need presence, purpose, and the courage to use your voice. And with this final thought resting gently in his heart, Daniel closed his notebook and stood up, ready to walk forward into the next chapter of his life, carrying with him all the lessons, all the growth, and all the quiet confidence that had turned him into a natural, strategic, and powerful communicator.